Okay, so let's go on to my dislikes now, and again, I'm doing this on the fly, so if there's other things that come up with my likes, and I might bounce around. But let's go to my dislikes. So I noticed all of this. When I first watched the movie, but I was trying to keep myself on track by watching it from a certain point of view because I wanted to enjoy the experience like a ride. I didn't want to walk out of there disappointed. I knew there would be other opportunities for me to look at it through a bit of a different lens, right? Which I did last night. So let's talk about the hospital. Let's talk about the subplot at this hospital. And again, I say this with all due respect. Making movies is hard. And I do understand what they were going for. I do understand, how important I still, and this is just my opinion only, okay? This is my opinion only. I still have trouble believing this was and I'm ready to be proven wrong, but I have trouble believing that this was the original intention from inception to create this really big theme, because it's really no longer subtext, really. This really big this real driving theme in these films about trauma and people and the evil in the world and how we're treating each other in the world. And listen, horror movies have been telling social commentary for decades. I mean, it's part of, not all horror movies do. Some are just A, B, C, D, and that's just it. But having a social commentary about us as human beings and society and the world and how we treat each other is nothing new. They've been doing that for, I was going to say millennia, for decades. And if it's done right and it's done really well, you may not even realize it because it's so under the radar that it's affecting you subconsciously rather than consciously. However, there are some films that are very overt. And I just have trouble believing this was the original intention because it feels very much a driving force of Jamie Lee Curtis. We know that she's a social activist herself. We know she's very vocal about shit. And I've always said it felt to me that she needed, in order to come back on board, she needed something that she felt really excited and passionate about. She liked the script, sure, but can we really focus this angle on it about Laurie's trauma and generational trauma and how it affects the town and this, and can we do this? Can we do this? Can we do this? Can we do this? Maybe that was the plan from the beginning, but it wouldn't surprise me if David Gordon Green and Danny McBride were like, oh, sure, yeah, we weren't planning on going like that, hard into the paint on it. But sure, if it meant getting Jamie Lee on board, then they're going to do it. Now, I have no evidence to suggest that's what happened, but you really feel that picking up. And sometimes it doesn't feel organic to me. It feels like I just, so the hospital scene, there's a lot of stuff, like I really appreciate what they're trying to do. And I mean that, but I didn't believe a lot of the performances at the hospital. Some of the acting felt overselling. Some of the lines felt, it was a little too exposition-y. I know that's not a word. But it felt like, people have often said that they say the line "evil dies tonight" too many times. They do. I counted, I think it's about 4 or 5 outside of the chanting, "Evil dies tonight, evil." There's about 4 or 5, because I think we first hear it from Marion Chambers at the bar. We hear Tommy say it, I think, twice. We hear Brackett say it. And then somebody else says it, I think. Sure, it felt, it's almost becoming like just the way everybody was saying that, it didn't, I don't know, it just didn't feel authentic to me. It felt more like a punchline, more like the other thing that I didn't think was necessary from a writing standpoint is how many times, and believe it or not, watch the film again, how many times somebody refers to the fact that it's been 40 years. It's said a lot in this movie. Tommy says it at the bar. Brackett says it when he's talking to Barker. Tommy says it again when he's talking to Laurie. Karen says it a couple of times. Cameron says, listen, for 40 years. Like, it felt like we know this. I understand saying it once, but I don't think it was necessary to say it as many times as we did. It almost felt like they were turning to the camera and saying, in case you didn't know, it's been 40 years. It just felt overdone. It felt like there were certain lines that were asked of these actors to say that didn't feel that you would talk like that. You would naturally speak like that. It felt very much, not to this degree, but the only example I could think of off the top of my head is the Star Wars prequels, right? Where some of the dialogue, like there's a scene in Revenge of the Sith, for you Star Wars nerds out there, where, and I'm paraphrasing, but Natalie Portman says something to the effect of, it's on Mustafar, it's at the end, and she's talking to Anakin, and she says something to the effect of, you're going down a path I cannot follow. Like she says something like that. I think she says cannot. Maybe she says can't. Anyway, it's just the way it was said. You're going down a path I can't follow. You know, let's say she says it like that. It's like nobody says it. Like you wouldn't talk like that. It felt very like, it's not quite Shakespearean, but it's like it's dirty English Shakespearean. Like it seems like it's just people don't talk like that. And there was a bit of that in this film where it felt just kind of overdone. Overselling it. And I had trouble sort of believing the performances a little bit. The acting's not bad. It's not terrible. You know, I didn't walk out of the theater going, well, that was a train wreck. I didn't think that at all. And I still didn't think it was a train wreck after my second viewing, but I did feel that there's certain lines I didn't really believe, you know, and unfortunately the legacy characters just kind of get lost. You know, I really do. It was fun seeing them again. It was fun to see them back, but we also have really no perspective on how long they've known each other. And you know, Tommy recognizes Karen, but when he walks into the hospital room to speak with Laurie, you know, it's like, Laurie. And she's like, Tommy? I mean, is this the first time we're seeing them in 40 years? Sorry, is this the first time they're seeing each other in 40 years? Or did they just have lunch like 3 weeks ago? Like, we don't know. We don't have that context and that perspective. So I don't know, as an audience, I don't know how, you know, emotional I should feel about this quasi reunion, like, or this weird sort of reunion. You know, for me as a writer, when I want to introduce legacy, characters again. And these are characters that have huge emotional impact and nostalgia to a certain fan base. And I know these characters haven't seen each other in a long time. I want to allow their reunions to breathe. I want that moment to breathe so the audience can feel the nostalgia, can feel, wow, they're looking at each other for the first time in 40 years. And look, I understand that you may not have time to do that, and you may not have time to do that for every reunion. I get that. But with Tommy and Laurie, it just felt a little quick, a little shoehorned in, a little dismissive. I wanted him, like maybe it should have been better if Tommy had visited the hospital. And I understand that maybe in the current form of the film, it wouldn't have been able to work that way because you'd have to write Tommy's sort of journey a bit differently. But you know, for example, take the fact that maybe it would have been cool if he comes to the hospital, Laurie's still unconscious, and you just hear beep, beep, you know, and he walks into the hospital room and he sits down, right? And you just hear way off in the distance, you know, Dr. Sump, you know, line 1, please, Dr. line 1, you know, and he sits down and he's looking at her, you know. So there's that moment we as the audience like, wow, this is Tommy and fucking Laurie. This is like, oh, gee, shit, they're looking at each other. And then maybe he holds her hand and she wakes up and she's like, Tommy. And he's like, hey, it's me. You know, it's like, is it really you? Like, I haven't seen, you know. And so we get an idea of how long it's been. There's breathing room there for us to sit with this moment, this moment, this reunion moment. There was none of that. None of that between any of the legacy characters. I didn't feel any of that. It just felt like they were just there. And like I said, part of the reason why could have been that maybe the writers just didn't think to write that, or maybe they just didn't have the time to do it because there was so much going on, which I'll get to in a second. So I really would have loved to have seen more of that breathing room with some of the characters. And here's a complete missed opportunity. Brackett and Laurie don't even have a scene together. We see him recognize the name when Karen says, it's Laurie Strode. We see him kind of go, Laurie, you know, and he looks over and the camera kind of shows his little tag that says Brackett, I mean, that's cool, but we never see Laurie and Brackett have a scene together at all. Complete missed opportunity. Another moment that would have been nice. And listen, I understand the more legacy characters you have in a film, the more that, you can't just be having all these weepy, emotional, I get it takes up a lot of screen time. And maybe that's why you write a movie where you don't bring back so many characters, but like, again, it's a catch-22, right? Like, I understand all this. I'm just saying that as a fan and as a writer, I would have been conscious of that. Would have been like, hey, I think we need to let this moment breathe, because I didn't really feel attachment to any of them. I didn't feel any moment where I was like, wow, there they are again. Not at all. I didn't feel that at all. I thought the performances were fine. I thought Anthony Michael Hall as Tommy Doyle was fine. I thought he was fine. I actually would love to have seen more of him, more of an opportunity for him to grow as a character in that role. But the hospital stuff with the legacy characters and some of the dialogue and some of the lines, it just really wasn't working. I think it's serviceable. Like, for somebody like Bruce, he was like, it's a horror movie, When I said to him, some of the dialogue was campy and cheesy and all that, he recognized it too. I mean, he's not a stupid guy. He saw it, but he turned to me and he goes, it's a slasher, whatever, because he's that kind of fan, right? He's not looking at it through the same lens that we are, right? In terms of the genre, right? But on second watch, I was like, this doesn't feels a little strange. The pacing is a little weird. I think the pacing in Halloween 18 is far better. I do. I think it's better. I think the pacing in this movie seems a little strange, but that also could be because every time we go back to the hospital, I don't think these moments at the hospital are strong enough to make me glad we're at the hospital. I'm kind of like, can we go back to Myers killing? And I hate to say that. And again, it's only on second watch. Maybe this film will grow. And like I've said, making movies is fucking hard. It's very, very hard. Nobody goes out to make a bad movie or to make these things, by and large. Nobody goes out to make something that's not going to jive with people. And a lot of what I'm saying may be completely irrelevant to some of you. You might be like, that didn't bother me at all. But the pacing of the film, on second watch, I was looking at the movie through a bit of a different lens now, and I was like, this does feel a little kind of strange, a little disjointed, a little slow at certain moments. Doesn't quite feel right. Like, we should, maybe if we just kind of take this, move this over here and do this, that it'll pick up the pace a bit. It might feel a bit better, because how you edit something, I mean, for those of you that don't know, it's not just that maybe you don't have enough or that you need more. Sometimes it's just in the order for which you edit your story. Sometimes, you can have a sequence of events play out where you're like, it's fine, but there's something not, what if we put this here and that there? Does that, and all of a sudden it's like, that flows so much better. It could just be a matter of that. I know I'm not the only one that noticed that, this weird thing with this mentally ill patient that shows up at the hospital, and all of a sudden there's this moment where almost like there's this subplot with this mental patient that has escaped and that shows up at the hospital that looks nothing like Myers. I mean, with all due respect, he looks like Danny DeVito. And it's just kind of like, I had trouble believing that people would think this was Michael Myers. I don't believe that. I mean, that would be like somebody confusing me for James Jude Courtney. I mean, I'm 5'8", he's 6'3". I mean, it doesn't, I had trouble, like maybe if it was somebody that was just, was taller and just looked, I had trouble with that. And I know what that scene was all about. And at the end of the day, that scene was to communicate to the audience. It was an example of misinformation. Right. And this is where I'm saying where they're bringing a lot of these themes into the movie that I don't necessarily believe was the intention from the beginning. And that doesn't mean it can't work. But this scene was all about misinformation, about what happens to people when they hear something and they just run with it without verifying it, right? Without actually doing the due diligence to verify it. And you see this mob mentality. You see respectable people, doctors, nurses, security guards, rising up and running through the hospital, and evil dies tonight, and here's this guy that looks like he's 5'3" pee. And, he's there and he's like, and they're running down the hall. And Karen recognizes that it's not Michael, obviously, because she went face to face with him. And is like, no, it's okay. Come here. It's okay. And even on my first watch, even trying to watch it with my expectations tempered, I remember thinking to myself, yeah, this feels strange. It's not, it could be perceived as the Sartain moment in Halloween Kills, but I don't think it's as jarring as the Sartain moment in H18. Again, this is where the nuance comes in. Like if you had to point to something in Halloween Kills that maybe was like a Sartain moment, that might be it. But I don't think it's as jarring as what happened in 18. But it still felt like filler. It still felt like we need this in here because we want to show how mob and crowds react to misinformation. And it's kind of like, okay, but it felt kind of, it takes up a lot of screen time, and I get it. And the message was delivered and it works. I totally got it. Like I got what they were doing, because then he ends up killing himself, right? He jumps off through a window and he hits the pavement, and he ends up killing himself. And that's tragic. And they're responsible for that. Not obviously they didn't actually attack him, but they are, well, I guess they kind of were. They are directly responsible for that. So what are the ramifications of that? What does that mean? It just felt, I don't know. I just didn't, it just felt like filler and kind of like, why are we going here? Like, let's get back to, it felt a little off track for me. I didn't, and I noticed that the first time. Again, on my first watch, I did notice it, but I was putting it to the back of my mind, just taking it as is, because I wanted to kind of, but last night it was very kind of weird. But again, maybe in subsequent viewings, it won't bother me as much. I don't know, but I do not understand how a town that has been tormented by Michael Myers for 40 years could mistaken Danny DeVito for Michael Myers. I have trouble believing that. I mean, at least make him look like it's plausible this could be him. But maybe that was the idea, that it's so clearly not him, the representation of it's so clearly not the proper evidence, you know what I mean? But it goes to show you that people will believe anything when there is when they don't do their due diligence or whatever. I mean, maybe that's the idea. If you were to speak to David Gordon Green and Danny McBride, maybe they would say, no, the idea was to have him look nothing like him because that's the point. And from a writing perspective, I get it. I understand that. But I can't say that I liked the scene or the moment really. Some good gore, though, when you see him on the pavement, his head's all smushed and that was good. That was fun. So yeah, and then of course Laurie rides, and I had trouble. This is where, I've talked about this before too, and I'm going to say it again. This is where I've said many times, and look, as you know, Halloween purist, I'm okay. Like I can watch the original Halloween on its own and leave it there. But you do know that Halloween 2, 81 is my favorite sequel. And, I can watch Halloween 1 on its own. It's a complete story. I can watch Halloween 2 with Halloween 1. And for me, that's a complete story. And I'm okay. Like, I'm not a huge proponent of the brother-sister arc. I don't think it's necessary. And of course, I was okay with them negating part 2. We know they negated part 2 because of the brother-sister arc. They didn't want to have that in there. And they know that how are we going to explain Michael surviving an inferno like that? They just didn't want to deal with that. So they left it out. But the more this story goes on, and the more that the writers ask us to believe that this town has been, not just Laurie now, the town has been like really tormented by this 40-year-old thing, the more I have trouble believing it. And listen, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. Who the fuck am I to say, who am I to question anybody's PTSD, right? Like, let me just first say that everybody is different. And who am I to say that something like that on a small town wouldn't affect a town like that for 40 years? But I'm a pretty smart guy, and I have trouble believing that it would. Not to say that it's not an eyesore or that it doesn't last, but the more the story asks us to believe that this town is just, where they are with Michael Myers, the more I have trouble believing that it would be there based on the 1978 film only. Now, I understand why they got rid of part 2. I get it. I would have made the same decision. But if hypothetically, if you included part 2, let's forget about the brother-sister thing and how we're going to explain that he survived a fire. Let's just forget about that for a minute. Think about all the carnage that happened in part 2 and happened at the hospital, right? So when you think of everything that Lori went through in part 1, everything she went through in part 2, everything, you know, that happened at the hospital and at the town and the media and all that kind of stuff, it makes it feel like, you know, that the town would be more like, whoa, if all that was still canon, because it just adds to the mayhem. It adds to the legend, the lore, the reason why they would be like going crazy. And it makes sense then why the hospital, Haddonfield Memorial, it's still called the same. The logo is still the same. That's just fan service. But, you know, it makes sense then why this hospital will be like, hang on. He fucking murdered nurses. He murdered fucking doctors. You know, he fucking murdered, you know, security guards. It makes sense then why doctors, nurses, and security guards are rising up going, evil dies tonight, going, even though it didn't happen to them, maybe it happened to one of their parents, or maybe it happened to their grandfather or you know, or something, right? And then it almost feels like why the hospital, why all these doctors and nurses have totally thrown ethics out the window, have totally thrown security out the window, and are just running with a bunch of civilians through this hospital with no disregard to security or safety. And listen, I get that's the idea. I get the subtext there. I totally get that. Totally get that. But I think it would be more believable that they would do that if all the shit that happened in part 2 was canon. Do you know what I mean? Like, it almost feels like the deeper we go into the psychosis of the town, the more that I feel you need more of what happened in the past. Now, that's me, but I do kind of feel that way a bit, even though I'm the first to say that you don't need it. So that was kind of strange. All the hospital stuff I'm not crazy on. I also find it strange, and listen, I mean, it's not like I visit a hospital every day. Maybe this is common in the States. Maybe it's common in some hospitals here in Canada. I don't know. But I did find it strange that you could just walk down a hall and look in through a window like you're looking at your newborn baby and see dead bodies lying on a gurney or lying on a table, and they're just there nude, and it's just kind of like, can you just, I mean, poor Oscar's mom had to find out her son died by looking through a window and seeing his naked body just lying there. I mean, are there no curtains? Is there no disregard, or no regard, I should say, for the general public walking? I mean, it just seems kind of strange. Like, I'm like, really? Do we, you know, and again, I understand that this could be perceived as nitpicks. Totally get that. But I'm looking at it now through that Halloween purist lens, right? And I'm thinking to myself, I mean, at least have a curtain or something. Like, maybe there's a curtain and Oscar's mom looks through the crack of the curtain. Like, she's walking down the hall and she looks and she's like, what's that? And she goes over and she kind of looks through the crack of the curtain. And then there's maybe like this 70s style Black Christmas / It's Me, Billy Zoom up on Oscar's body or something. That would be totally out of character for this kind of movie. But yeah, but that kind of thing, right? She kind of goes to the curtain and she's like, what's in there? And she looks through and then she kind of sees her son's body and she's like, oh my God, you know what I mean? Because then at least there's like an attempt to conceal it. Like, it just kind of feels like, yeah, come walk down this way and come look at your dead body. It just feels strange to me, unless there's something I'm missing. But that felt a little strange and a little kind of weird. You know, and you know, this would be perceived as a nitpick, but Tommy referring to himself as Tommy, I don't think I would have written that. I don't think, you know, sometimes, I mean, listen, it's sometimes people who are called Billy, Tommy, Timmy as their kids, you know, when they're kids, are still called that when they're adults. But usually it's a child thing. It's an endearing thing. It's kind of like a, you know, it'd be like calling me Davy, right? I mean, you know, I'm probably not going to be called Davy. Not that there aren't examples of adults still being called Davy, Tommy, Billy, Timmy. Absolutely. Billy Idol. You know what I mean? But I don't know if he would refer to himself as Billy. You know, I think, you know, when he says, and I'm Tommy Doyle, and I would have written it as, and I'm Tom Doyle, and I'm, you know what I mean? Like, because I think he would have referred to himself as Tom. I could see Lori saying Tommy. If the last time she saw him was 40 years ago, there's that natural connection. I'm going to call him Tommy. You know what I mean? But if they've been hanging out and going out to lunch and stuff, she probably calls him Tom now. You know, again, that's a nitpick. Doesn't really mean anything at the end of the day. But just from a writing perspective, if I was writing the script, I probably would have written it. I probably would have written it that way, that he calls himself Tom, because it just shows a progression of the character. He's an adult now. He's not a little boy. So yeah, just that's kind of how I feel about some of the stuff at the hospital. And I know I will probably have some more things to say in the subsequent days and weeks and going on Hallowstream and all that kind of stuff. And but that stuff I can't. I have to admit, not that there aren't a few things at the hospital that I like, but by and large, most of the hospital stuff I'm like, you know, it doesn't really. Yeah, it didn't do much for me, I'll say. And I think that's because there's just a lot going on, and the performances are, you know, there's some performance issues maybe, or there's just lines that people, it's just kind of strange. I think maybe if they had dialed back how many people that were in this film, that maybe there would have been more time to have that breathing room and to have that moment. Like, for example, so the gay couple at the Myers house, Big John and Little John, you know, that's cute. That's fun. You know what I mean? And I totally support showing representation. I really like that the hospital showed a lot of diversity. I do like that, seeing all different walks of life, because it's really important that, you know, people see themselves on screen. I do mean that. I don't think that's a woke comment at all, but it's got to be done organically. You know, it's got to feel genuine. I mean, if it feels preachy and condescending, then you're just going to turn people off, right? It's got to feel really natural and organic. And I really like the way they did that. It just is, you know what I mean? And that was really cool. I totally support that. And the gay couple, I think, was fun. I really enjoyed that. However, from a story perspective, maybe if they had removed them from the picture and moved all their, and just had the Myers house abandoned, I'm wondering how much, having removed them, not, again, folks, nuance, not because they're gay, I couldn't care less. Just, you know, it could have been a straight couple. I'd be saying the same thing. But you know, there's somebody out there going, oh, it's because they're gay. No, it has nothing to do with that. I'm just talking about what in the movie could we remove and sort of maybe kind of help the pace so we can concentrate more on the hospital, maybe concentrate more on some reunion activity, and allow maybe some certain things to breathe and bring up the pacing. Or I don't know, there's just something. I'm trying to figure out certain, like, where in the movie, or maybe the couple with the drone, right? Maybe we figure out something there, or just something, not sacrificing the kills and the blood and the guts, but you know, after my second watch, I was trying to figure out how can we kind of, or how would I maybe make this feel a bit more kind of not so disjointed, but that's neither here nor there. I mean, there's many ways that you can do that. The moment with Lindsay and Marion and I love this couple. I really liked them. The I forget their names, but the black couple at the beginning of the movie in the bar. They were in the first film as well, but they had cameos where they're dressed as a doctor and a nurse and what. I really liked them. I thought they were really good. Strong performances and some nice humor, which I really liked. I again, humor that landed. It was the right moment. The timing is right. I like that. The humor landed well, which was cool. But the scene with them in the car with Lindsay and Marion and whatnot, you know, I mean, it was okay. I did find it strange why the nurse, the one that was dressed as a nurse, I like that she's dressed as a nurse, but she's actually a doctor, and her husband is dressed as a doctor, but he's actually a nurse. I like that. That was fun. But I wonder why she ran off to come back. Like, she kind of fell out of the car and then she ran off, and Myers is killing Marion or her husband, and then she comes back to shoot him. I'm like, why wasn't she shooting him at the moment that her husband was in trouble? I don't understand that. I found that kind of weird. And again, I don't think this is nitpicking. This is just kind of like, I'm like, why would she, like, she fell out. I didn't get the impression she was unconscious and then came to. She just kind of fell out of the car and then was not there. And then all of a sudden she's running down the street back to the car, firing the gun. It's a cool shot. Like, it's a cool moment. She's like fucking going Sarah Connor shit. I like it. It's kind of fun. where did she go for like 30 seconds? Did she have to use the washroom or something? Like, I don't know why it took her so long to shoot him. So that was kind of weird. But then, of course, that leads into the great moment with Lindsay, which I really like, you know, and the hiding and the bit of the stalking there. I really, really like that. So, you know, but yeah, you know, I mean, you know, and then what else? Let's see here. Other dislikes. I didn't mind the symbolism of, this is a like, but well, it's kind of a, yeah, okay. So let's go to the, so those are some of my dislikes. I mean, most of my dislikes revolve around the hospital and the execution, the pacing, all that kind of stuff. The mixed feelings. Okay, so let's go to my notes here. Let's go to my mixed.